So Bittensor, well, the moniker at the moment is it's a decentralized, incentivized commodities market. Now, we used to say a decentralized, incentivized machine learning net, and it is, in a sense. However, we're not now limited to subnets to machine learning. And what that means is that we have a singular network that allows to spawn instances of decentralized compute. And the miners are producing commodity, be that reports, responding to text queries, images, compute, pre-training, price predictions, anything that currently exists and may exist on the network, or even something as rudimentary as storage space. So they produce this commodity, and then the validator, through a rewards mechanism, decides who is doing it best, whose commodity has the most value, and grades, which is called setting weights, all of the participants in the network. And that enables the participants to receive incentive on-chain for their actions, and the network itself to improve, because by rewarding those that are doing the best job and dropping off those that are doing the worst job, you obviously have a natural evolution of improvement. Do you want the version I give to my mom?
You're listening to the Contango podcast, where we take you behind the scenes as we identify, diligence, and discuss private investment opportunities at the bleeding edge of Web3. Hey everyone, I'm excited to share with you my conversation with Mogmachine, founder of Taostats and one of the most prolific builders in the Bittensor ecosystem. Bittensor is a peer-to-peer digital commodity market and enables the creation of artificial intelligence through decentralized networks of subnets. These subnets all specialize in a certain aspect of either machine learning or digital commodity production, such as bandwidth, compute, or storage. Taostats is an in-depth dashboard charting the activity of everything on the Bittensor ecosystem, from miners to validators and even subnets. Mog is also the co-founder of Corcel, an LLM aggregator, combining the power of ChatGPT, Grok, and many other centralized LLMs into a single, easy-to-use user interface. I've been diving pretty deep into the Bittensor ecosystem over the last 3 months, so I think it goes without saying I'm extremely excited for this conversation, and I'm excited to be able to share it with all of you. So, with that in mind, here is my conversation with Mogmachine. This is a conversation that I've been excited for quite some time. And I think anybody that knows me closely knows that I'm extremely Tau-pilled now and have been kind of going down this deep rabbit hole over the last few months. But, you are probably one of the most prolific people in the Bittensor ecosystem. And I think it's probably a great place to start for the listeners to tell them a little bit about your background prior to Bittensor and maybe how you got Tau-pilled yourself.
It's an accidental crown. It's funny you should say that. It's not one a position of responsibilities I asked for. And after 25 years as a web developer in a very unappreciated role, I often felt working for a lot of London agencies as the secret guy not on the books that just got stuff done. I sometimes feel that I'm placed maybe on a pedestal more than I deserve in this ecosystem. But as I say, I came to it from a web development background. And I was interested and invested in crypto since, say, 2017. Had lost an interest in it by end of 2020, 2021. Floated around looking for things that really interested me and motivated me, and stepped back from web development to concentrate on having a child and hanging out with him for a little bit while he was a baby and being a good husband. And how Bittensor came into, I'll give credit where credit's due, Dreadbongo. Dreadbongo, someone who had turned me on to quite a few projects in the past. That said, because I hadn't been very wholesomely following everything, I wasn't paying for early access Discord groups. I knew he was into something. And then when he tweeted about it, the price went like that. And I knew that, it was over, you were too late. You hadn't got there at the right time. However, I was interested in the project. And GPT came out at the time and was coming to sort of public prominence. And so I started to started to understand I need to know a little bit more about this project. And truth be told, as the initial tweet euphoria settled over the next month or so, price went down again. I just looked at it from an investment opportunity and thought to myself, one tweet had this much of an effect. And where this project sits in the public mindset of where narratives are going over the next couple of years at the depth of the bear market, where I was challenging myself to get more and more involved running nodes, because I didn't come from a DevOps, SysOps background. I was a fairly rudimentary developer. I started to get involved as an investor and then as a validator. And as I started doing that, I started keeping spreadsheets, Google Docs that I was then uploading every day and sharing within the fairly small Discord community. Started to make some friends. And eventually it just became a kind of a fairly obvious evolution that I would put these spreadsheets onto a website, which I was updating by hand every day, an hour and a half every morning, updating this little website by hand. And obviously people asking me, is this data real time? Well, no, not really. And it was obvious that it should be. And another contact that I'd made through Discord helped me out with connecting me and writing Python scripts in order to connect the dots and to essentially make the data real time. And that's how on January 13th, just over a year old, last year, Taostats was born. And Taostats, well, the popularity surprised me, but it was a real pleasure to be building something and involved in something where the work you put in directly translates to, say, what you get out. And my ability to read the room and understand the direction of the project and the ecosystem as a whole has really helped me to understand what needs to be done, where we need to position ourselves. And obviously, just after Finney in mid to late beginning of Q2 last year, we launched Bit API, which was the API access. Terrible name, great one.
I think it's all right.
You know, a number of times I've had to sit there with people going, so Bitterpie?
Yeah. I mean, to read it, it's not so great, but it rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, I think I was on a call with someone, I believe from the foundation actually, who was getting involved in some marketing, and one of the questions they said to you, how attached are you to that name? Considering changing it? Fine. Actually, I had been going around, so we actually changed it. We had a big team change around. We upgraded our team towards the end of last year, and we rebranded as Corcel, and we've been going from strength to strength. And then we concentrated much more on also building and developing apps and things. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, two things I have to say. First of all, I mean, the title of probably one of the most prolific people in the ecosystem, very well deserved. And we can talk about all the things that you're building afterwards. Two is Dread Bongo is also one of the guys that got me into the space from afar, just as a kind of an influencer on X. But his dedication and his conviction, really did a lot for me to kind of go deeper into the project. So would love to have him on the show eventually. Don't know him personally, but
we're making shouts out to Bongo. I've always wanted to say this to him. Let's hope he's listening.
Yeah,
it's very. He's English, as you may know that I am, and I watched him for quite a long time, sort of evolving his profile online. And when you kind of feel an affinity to somebody because you're like, I know what only the English people watching this will. And this guy could be easy. Like he seems like a down to earth, nice guy that I would get on with if I met in the pub. And I just sort of met him, but you're in Twitter cryptosphere, and so you can't make connections with people because, as he rightly pointed out, and this is why I love him so much, because he's so honest, he's a bit honest and human. And I knew obviously he was getting a lot of contacts from people, sort of going, all right, want to be my mate, kind of thing, and always with an ulterior motive. So yeah, I think as an English person, he definitely deserves a credit for being one of the most human people on crypto Twitter that I would say still is there. So yeah, you should get credit.
I'm not even English, and I would say the same thing. Like, he just seems like a very down-to-earth, transparent guy. He doesn't seem like he has ulterior motives with what he pitches. But anyways, shouts out to Dread Bongo. We'll move on. But you're actually a phenomenal kind of advocate and I guess resource to teach people about Bittensor, just kind of the protocol as a whole. you recently just gave a great presentation at the Yearbit Assembly. Maybe if you could just kind of give, I don't know, I know this is a tough ask, but a 2-minute overview of kind of what Bittensor is in its entirety.
Okay, absolutely. They want me to compress my 23 minutes into 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Which 23 was already a compression.
One of the less known facts of me is that I used to teach at university many, many years ago. And I used to teach kind of coding, and this was back in the early 2000s. It was multimedia arts degree, web development. When the web and all web and authoring and 3D were all just packaged into one kind of degree, and out you were thrown with no knowledge. And I've always felt that if you can't explain something to someone that doesn't understand anything about it, and adapt your explanation for the person we're speaking to, then you need to. It should be anyone's responsibility to be able to explain something. So Bittensor. Well, the moniker at the moment is it's a decentralized, incentivized commodities market. Now, we used to say a decentralized, incentivized machine learning network, and it is in a sense. However, we're not now limited to subnets to machine learning only, although that should be and is a primary focus. And what that means is that we have a singular network that allows subnetworks to spawn instances of decentralized compute. And that is, you have these arrays, a collection of nodes, participants within the network, miners and validators. And the miners are producing a commodity, be that reports, responding to text queries, images, compute, pre-training, price predictions, anything that currently exists and may exist on the network, or even something as rudimentary as storage space. So they produce this commodity, and then the validator, through a rewards mechanism, decides who is doing it best, whose commodity has the most value, and grades, which is called setting weights, all of the participants in the network. And this is balanced out into something called an incentive landscape, which is a kind of like a picture of the incentives over the entire subnetwork by something called Yuma consensus. And that enables the participants to receive incentive on-chain for their actions, and the network itself to improve, because by rewarding those that are doing the best job and dropping off those that are doing the worst job, you obviously have a natural evolution of improvement. Do you want the version I give to my mom?
Sure.
I give to my mom, and sometimes I have to give to VCs and people in private chats. So we take it back to a more simplistic way. You have got 100 university professors in a room that you've brought in to answer questions. They're very, very intelligent people. And you've got 100,000, however many clients that you're going to let in. And so do a couple of other validators or people in your position who are there to, provide access to these experts. And so before you let them in, you go and ask all these experts a series of questions. And based on those questions, you grade them, you line them up in order of their the value that you give to their answers. And then you discuss this and your responses with your other peers who are also performing the same job. And depending on the importance or the size of the number of clients you've got standing behind you to let in, amongst your peers, your view is slightly weighted. So if I'm someone who, has a higher status as a validator, more customers behind me, my opinion is slightly more weighted than some guy who's just said, hey, I'm a validator, got no clients, and hasn't been doing this for a long time. So it's a natural network effect. And what happens is we all come to agreement, we line them all up, we get rid of the three at the bottom, because honestly, we could do with bringing in 3 more better. Good, there you go. Now allow all of our customers to come in and question and interact with these university professors. In an hour, we'll take them all out again and we'll ask the questions again, just to make sure that everything is okay. We'll knock off the last 3, we'll line them up again, and we'll keep doing that.
Mm.
You could replace the university professors with dinner ladies or any other producer of a commodity which you can then grade and judge and incentivize.
It's incredible. It's like a reversion back to the freest market capitalism that we could possibly have. But I do want to touch on something which is really important in the ecosystem, obviously, which is incentives. And as we know, artificial intelligence is extremely compute intensive, and there's a lot of cost that goes into building these models and these trillion parameters, etc. Can you talk about the importance of the merging of cryptocurrency and AI or machine models or digital commodities or whatever terminology we want to use for these, but the importance of having this incentive layer built into the actual protocol itself?
Well, as someone who had got a bit fed up with crypto in many, many facets, I would say when people say, oh, it's a crypto project, it's not technically a crypto project. It's a machine intelligence project. It's almost an economics study or project at the moment. It's one of the few utilizations of a decentralized ledger or blockchain. See, I'm avoiding using the C word here, where it actually fits the use case. If you want to reward people and incentivize them in an open, decentralized manner, then the best fit is a decentralized ledger, is a blockchain. That's what it's there for, to allow an ecosystem like this to exist in an open, transparent, decentralized way. So it really fits the bill in terms of being able to offer an open incentivization layer for something like this to exist. It's a kind of natural evolution from, I don't want to offend any Bitcoin maximalists here, because obviously we're not going to say that the hashing power or the GPU power within Bitcoin isn't generating value, because it's generating the Bitcoins which are given value. But within the Bittensor Network, the actual act of using the compute is also generating the value within the network. There is fundamental Tau value attached to every piece of intelligence that is created on the network.
Mm-hmm. And that's incredibly important, both in compensating people for the value that they're adding, but also in bootstrapping the network kind of from scratch. So I can give a real world example. As you know, we meet with AI projects all the time, and we had a company that is doing a generative AI project. They're spending $1 million a year on AWS server costs, and essentially got them to go through this kind of this thought process of what would happen if they would ported their workload over to Bittensor. And not only are they're saving $1 million a year in doing so, but they're actually getting paid for the content that they're creating. So it's sure, from a philosophical perspective, it makes sense to go with something decentralized, and and that could be your motive. But from a sheer dollars and cents perspective, because we're so early in the network and it's still in the process of bootstrapping these early participants, it financially incentivizes you as well.
Yes, and you are very right. And from a builder's point of view, from our perspective, it's been huge, because it's allowed us to have a financial runway to do what we're doing and be rewarded proportionally. However, it's competitive, so it's not a free ride. So whilst there is an opportunity to gain a reward incentive within this network, there is competition at every single step of the way. Especially with, it's one thing to say, well, I'm going to make a subnet and I'm going to put all my miners on there, and we're going to reap the rewards because that's what we do as a company. And we've had companies approach and say, well, yeah, can we make a subnet and put all of our miners on there? And the answer is, well, yes, you can. But the rest of the network, if they do what you're trying to do better, we'll get rid of all of your miners. And so they'll be then performing the task, which of course actually opens up the opportunity for natural development of products. So for instance, subnet 8, the price prediction subnet, that is Taostats is existing based on an existing product of time series prediction for funds or price prediction. And they realized through an in-house team that they were limited in the evolution or the development of their models, and by opening it up to the Bittensor community and providing incentive for those who did the best job, they were going to be able to find and reward and incentivize those that were providing the most value to their business.
Mm-hmm. Well, that touches on two things that I want to talk about. One of them being kind of the dangers of centralization and the true merits of decentralization. But first, maybe let's talk a little bit about the constituents of the network. So you have You have miners, you have validators, and you have subnet owners. Tell us a little bit about how they all interact and what each of those constituents does within the network.
Let's go from the bottom up. I can get in trouble for this. I love with miners. I have mined myself because you have to know how it's going, but I don't. The miners get a bad rep, and they do sometimes deserve it. The miners produce the intelligence. They're fundamental to the work. That said, they are driven by incentive mostly, which is fair enough. That's what happens. It's all about maximizing the incentive for the operation that you're trying to do, and to perform that operation in the most cost-effective, reliable, and best manner that you can. This often drives miners, I would say, not against the health of the network, but they are more motivated to do their job, what's required to maximize incentive over anything else. So if the code is good, the subnet is good, then miners will contribute to the growth of that subnet. But if the code is bad, the miners won't kill your subnet, but the miners will find holes in your code and will do what needs to be done to maximize incentive without necessarily the health of the subnet. Now, you might see that as a bad thing, but it's not. It's making sure only the strong survive in terms of subnets.
And Mog, can I dig deeper on that quickly? So you said if the code is good, miners will be attracted. If code is bad, miners will kill your subnet. When you say the code of the subnet, are you essentially just talking about the incentive mechanism that the subnet owner is writing into their subnet to make sure that there's perfect competition? I think the general kind of layman's way that I look at building subnets is kind of like trying to maintain plasma in a nuclear reaction. Like, you have all these forces that are trying to get out in every different which way, but you have to kind of try and contain that into like this perfect competitive marketplace where everybody is adversarial, trying to get out in one way or another.
I mean, what I'm referring to is basically the validation process, therefore the rewards mechanism. How you validate, because UMA consensus is data agnostic. You assign value to text responses, image responses, anything at all. However, you still, as the validator, as a subnet creator, need to define a strong reward mechanism and validation process that anything has attack vectors that is resistant to the common attack vectors and any new ones that may arise due to your type of commodity. I don't want to delve into specific examples of subnets that have had issues recently, because I don't really think that's fair. But it's been a lot of subnet owners will happily admit that they initially felt they bit off more than they could chew, because they come along with a very naive mindset that if I make something that should be used in this way for the good of the network, and I've got this great idea of how this may work, the other participants are all going to use it in this way and everything will be rosy. And it hasn't been the case. I mean, I've understood that for a long time, and I think those that paid enough attention and have been here long enough should have learned from the lessons of the past, which were clearly played out in front of us, and understand this. But this is, keep saying, subnet phase 1 or wave 1 right now, where this initial wave of subnets, and we just filled up our initial slots, will slowly start to merge into a secondary wave of much stronger, varied reward mechanisms and other ways of really addressing these issues. Mm-hmm. These are the miners, but nothing against them, because they work hard. They play within the rules of the code, and without them, the subnet doesn't exist. Then you have the validator. The validators is an interesting bunch. Got to be careful, because they're my peers. As a subnet owner and a validator and someone who is also mined, obviously I can have multifaceted views of people, and this is a public, of entities, and this is obviously a public podcast. So the validators, as from my perspective initially, are the ones that should be building on the network. They're the ones who provide the gateway access to the data. The way the Bittensor is envisaged is that you must pass through a validator to access the data, to query the miners, to really interact. So that provides a, I won't say centralized, but a trusted gate of entry to the network, to the various aspects of the network. That said, not all validators, in order to be a validator, you must, especially pre-delegation, you just needed to align with the who had the largest amount of Tau. Quite simple. And many people acquired Tau from early stage mining and involvement in the network or purchasing, who had no intention to go on and become an AI provider, a development company, a software house, anything like that. And when delegation came, many who accorded the most amount of delegation, and for the reasons they used to attract delegation, again, wasn't necessarily because they were building or creating stuff, but because they provided the most attractive option at that time. And it's unfair to, well, it's not unfair, but it's a network effect at the moment that not all the large validators are grassroots building on the network. In fact, very few are. So at the moment, the validators are in a position of authority. They govern and decide where emissions go on the network. The top 12, as members of the Senate, can vote on core proposals for the network. And they are kind of like overseers to the direction. I mean, I know from behind the scenes, most, if not all, of the top validators are very present in the network, and they all have a vested interest from their, from their position and how they got to where they are. So I have all due respect for that, but they often come from different perspectives, shall we say. Not everyone is building. So their role at the moment is to run code in order to validate on behalf of the subnet owner the outputs of the miners. And that's what they do. And if they do that well, they will be rewarded through public delegation. If they don't do it well, or they don't understand the dynamics of what doing it well actually defies, then they won't get so much public delegation, and they can either continue on, but they may not rise through the ultra-competitive sort of ranks of validators. I could go on to subnet owner, but this, I should have gone the other way around, because this is going to lead us on to talking about dynamic Tau, which I know you need to. Just pause for a moment at the thought that the validators, decide where emissions go on the network. Quickly over the subnets. Subnet builders, they are core at the moment, and they're one of my favorite things about the Bittensor Network, because people who can and do are being rewarded the most. A VC can't be a subnet builder. A hedge fund can't be a subnet builder. The guy that can be a subnet builder is the guy that can get that product made. And I've seen it so many times. You can come to me, if you come to me with a subnet, I've got a subnet idea. Will you fund me? I don't need to fund you. What do you need funding for a subnet idea initially? You need to create the idea. If you really understand what you can do, all of the strong subnets, once you create a subnet, then yes, you will need support. You will need additional developers, marketing, product managers, and there is more to it. But the network will reward you for doing, and that's what the subnet creators do, and that's what the subnets are. They are essentially individual ecosystems that run on top of the network.
That's a phenomenal overview of all three. So if I can just summarize that in just a second, let's just say subnet owners create a marketplace for a digital commodity. So that could be anything from storage, bandwidth, compute, to actual machine learning itself. The miners are the ones that are providing the answers, or the commodity of value, and the validators are the ones that are asking the question or asking for that commodity of value. The validators are also the endpoint to allow anybody from the public to ask for that commodity of value, and in turn get those answers or those commodities from the miners. You give a great overview of how validators are truly right now in a position of power in the ecosystem. You have the Senate, they can vote on core proposals. They also vote on where the emissions go within the network. That is incredible power when it comes to potentially a network that could be the backbone of decentralized AI online. just recently, there's been a new proposal, you touched on it briefly, called dynamic Tau. This would decentralize some of that power from validators and, disperse that power throughout the network. So maybe if you could give a broad overview of what dynamic Tau is as it's suggested today.
So, as I say, in order to talk about dynamic Tau, I must first state that this is still a draft proposal. And before we talk about solution, I think we can talk about the problem. So the problem, as you illustrated, is that validators define the emissions. We have 100% of emissions with which we can distribute throughout all of the subnets. So you're saying you give me 100% and I've got 32 participants, subnet owners, and I need to split 100% of my emissions amongst those subnet owners. Human consensus is used so that the larger your stake is as a validator, the more weight you hold, but at the same time you require consensus. That just means even as a large validator, if you just go and give all of your 100% to one participant and no one else does, it's not going to work. It's not going to have enough of a weight. So what human consensus does is it provides a consensus between participants, but does assign a weight to their importance, to their position within the ecosystem. So that's what happens. And the reality is that most of this weight, I would say, can be exerted by the top 12 to 15 validators. They make up probably 90% of the total stake on the network. Therefore, it's their vote that matters the most. And whilst the foundation also believe, and I also believe that the validators are looking at this responsibly and do care. They probably are the participants who care most, and they are accountable to their delegates. Because if I was to go and perform a weight assigning action that none of my delegates liked, they would leave me and go to another validator. That said, it is still, in the words of Jacob Steves, an oligarchy and open to a system of ring kissing. And also, from the perspective of someone sitting in the chair, it leaves us very open to subnet owners coming to us and please set subnets, please set weights, can you please set weights? And you shouldn't have to ask for merit, you should earn merit. But if you are earning merit, you also shouldn't have to point out that you're earning merit with natural evolution. So that is what dynamic Tau seeks to solve. It seeks to use the same natural market dynamics to control the emissions of each subnet based on demand and value.
Free market capitalism at its finest. I think one thing I'd like to touch on, like one of the reasons I'm actually so bullish on this project is because of the core principles of the founding team or the Opentensor Foundation. Like for Jacob Steves to say, yes, this protocol right now is still susceptible to things like ring kissing, while being in a position of power simply just because of where they came from in the network and creating the network and being one of the largest participants. It really shows his belief in true full decentralization, and I guess the Opentensor Foundation's true belief in full decentralization. I'd like to ask your thought on that, like maybe just kind of waxing philosophical for a second. Like, why is decentralization specifically in AI such an important question?
Right. So at least I'd have to discuss Jake Lapsay. He is a great leader of this ecosystem, and I know he's taken some criticism for this sort of the way this dynamic Tau was presented to the community. But I think also when people, especially when something becomes a crypto project with a substantial market cap, a lot of people's emotional attachment to the decisions of those leading are very much motivated by the value of their own investment. And I think what people have to understand with Opentensor Foundation and Jacob and others specifically, this is not a get-rich scheme for them. This is not how do we pump the price of our token. This is literally how do we achieve our goals of fundamental decentralization of this distributed incentivized machine learning network. And Jacob's passion towards decentralization is stronger than his need to make his fans love him more. If that makes sense, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that. But to me, that's a fundamental thing, and I definitely this is something that that needs me always to sort of stand behind him in the sense, because it really cares about what he is doing over necessarily how popular it may make him at any given time. And obviously, when I'm not going to say if, when he gets it right, the naysayers and the critics, of course, will follow in line behind. So why is the decentralization so important? I'm actually, so this might be, well, I don't know, let's go for it anyway. You can decide if you edit it out later. On the fence of decentralization and centralization in these in this situation, and I'll explain to you why. What is centralized and decentralized? And I often refer to Bittensor as distributed rather than decentralized, because the core participants, those providing the commodities, are distributed, and by their distributed nature lean towards decentralization. But you could look at a network and say, well, actually on this particular network, a lot of the mining is being done by very, very few entities. So, that's centralized. And in comes this kind of the naysayers of decentralization. It's not decentralized enough. Or, well, hold on, it's a GPU network. Well, where are they all renting their GPUs from? A bunch of centralized providers. Accessing through the validators. Well, hold on, they are centralized entities. This network isn't decentralized. Why are we trying to make something decentralized so it is resistant? And that's, I think, what we have to look at is the network resistant to centralized control? Yes. Whether you like the structure of a particular subnet because you feel it overutilizes a centralized provider, be it GPT endpoints or another API endpoint, or focuses too much on one GPU provider, if you were to take that centralized endpoint away, the network would live on, and very quickly something else would spring up in its place, because this decentralized is not reliant on a centralized. So within a decentralized network, you can have centralized participants. You may say that Corcel is backed by a centralized entity, which is a registered company, which has a future revenue model. So hold on a minute, centralized access. As Jacob told me, Jake said to me a long time ago when we were discussing the creation of the API, and whether we should, I would want to create something truly decentralized. In order for a lot of big participants to interact with a decentralized network, they require a centralized point of trust, a centralized point of interaction in order to do so. It's just part and parcel of our relationship with decentralization. It's the same way we use custodial wallets for crypto. A lot of people, not everyone, but there's a reason why we go through Coinbase. If you want to tell your mum's aunt at Thanksgiving to get into crypto, you're not going to say, right, go on chain, make yourself your own. Well, you're going to say, go to Coinbase, sign up to Coinbase. Hold on a minute. This is decentralized money and you're sending me to... Yes, because, the foundations behind there, what is built on is decentralized. But in order for you to... Not everyone. If you tell me... I am a bit on the fence with that, because I'm a realist and I'm a product builder. And I'm not in denial, and I like to look at both sides of an argument. But why we need it in AI, I would say, is about diversity, openness, innovation, education. We've seen where open source software has taken us versus closed source software. When you have business models for companies being built on top of open source software, and how quickly it advances and moves forward, and how it's also open to a greater level of scrutiny. And I'm not talking about by governments and lobbyists, I'm talking by true users and communities. Those of us, and especially, and I'm not the youngest now, so I see the software ideologies of the younger generation. I really do have faith in this. For the very reason that people like Jacob and Alec can succeed in getting a network like this online. And if you don't do good, if you do evil, the community will destroy you in open source. Whereas if you don't do good and you do evil in closed source, as long as the shareholders are happy, it's all right. You can probably get away with it until you get to exit stage.
Yeah.
So there's so many fundamentally important reasons why we do need decentralization in this.
Well, that was an incredible answer, first of all. And I love that you made the distinction between decentralization and distributed networks. And I honestly, I fully agree with your sentiment there. And this is why, specifically in the Web3 space, companies often start centralized and then have this kind of roadmap to move to decentralization over time. But you're right, if you want to bring in institutions, they still need to have a central point of trust and authority in order to give them access to those types of networks. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I also might use the term democratized in the sense of Bittensor as well, because I, as a Tau holder, can essentially vote on where I want to delegate my stake. And soon, with dynamic Tau, can vote on, which subnet tokens I want to hold, and therefore vote on where the emissions of the network go. So, in that case, it's democratized in the sense that truly the best subnets should, in theory, win out over time. And, this meritocracy gets developed where, the best answers are really kind of rising to the top. So I think that's extremely just as important as being a distributed network. Would you agree?
Yes, and I'm going to pick up on your meritocracy and the best answers rise to the top, because there's been a lot of criticism on this concept. I'm not going to go into the dynamics of how these dynamics, the intricacies of how dynamic Tau work. There was a focus very much more towards a more tokenization aspect, and I think this is being now addressed to look at some of the issues, community issues, and deeper understanding issues of this. The fundamentals of it, and I know Jacob was criticized for saying, no one should get a free lunch in terms of APR, but it is, I have to agree with him on this. People in the meritocracy sense, investors also will be rewarded for the more involvement that they wish to show, and their good choices will be rewarded. So again, going back to the fundamentals, I'm going to go on the crypto basket. If you are giving someone crypto advice and they're not going to do anything, you say, buy Bitcoin. Hey, buy a Bitcoin, buy a bit of Ethereum. But if you're willing to put the time in and to educate yourself, there are a whole other bunch of products out there where you could make a hell of a lot more money or lose a lot of money. But is there the opportunities there? But if you don't want to take it, that's fine. It's a meritocracy. The more you put in, the more you learn, the more you'll make. And I think this is where we, or Jacob, would like to push this. If you understand and you take the time to understand the network and the dynamics of the network, there are opportunities to push the direction of the network, to help those that require it, because by giving emissions, you're getting financial runway to projects. So that's now taken out of the hands of the validators and put into the hands of the many, and profit from that yourself, from your wise choice. So it's a meritocracy, and the best response or best choices are being rewarded.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, especially over time, right now, if I'm a staker, I can just earn my kind of, in some ways, free lunch, 16, 18% even, which is an incredibly great reward for any asset class. Maybe actually we can go into why those rewards are so high as of right now. And this is also another reason I have such conviction in the project, is because of how closely it correlates to, kind of the token economy of Bitcoin. For anybody that's getting into the Web3 space, or now even kind of the AI space, you should understand the token emissions of Bitcoin and why it's valuable. It's because it's scarce. There's only 21 million of them. You can't print more. It has a fixed supply schedule that we'll know from year 1 to year 1000. It's very resistant to being co-opted. For example, you can't just print $6 trillion in a government shutdown and expect everything to be hunky-dory. It doesn't work like that. Bittensor also followed the same model. So maybe, Mog, do you want to speak to a little bit about why this model actually works, for example, with no VC overhang, no pre-mine, no... I was
going to say, no pre-mine, and
immaculate conception.
Not even a Satoshi wallet somewhere sitting around.
Exactly.
Of course, there were participants in the network who gained a lot from their involvement. But at the same time, when you launch a network from nothing, you need those people that are going to sit there for 6 months, literally just, and even on CPU at those stages, not eating, not sleeping, just mining this coin because they believe in where it will go. It's blind belief. But in terms of in emissions, obviously they're going down fast. I'm not going to say that they're not sustainable. We're not in a non-sustainable sort of APR. It was a year and a bit ago when I first joined. It was about 45% for validators. Now we're down to about 20% or 60% for delegators. And all you need to understand this is where we currently are in terms of issuance. Of 21 million, we have just crossed the 6 million barrier. And 89, if not 90, let's say 90% of all Tau emitted are staked, because there is no lockup. There's no unstaking lockup, nothing at all. You stake, you unstake. If you hold Tau and you haven't delegated it somewhere, it either means you've just bought it and you're moving it somewhere to delegate, or you're about to sell it and you're moving it somewhere to delegate, or you don't understand Tau. Because there is absolutely no reason to not delegate your Tau. And so that creates very low liquidity, which is an Achilles heel of the project in some ways, and in other ways, actually, I'm not sure. I don't believe it is. I mean, I know a lot of people disagree, but in terms of, it positions it in a very unique position in the crypto world, which I'm probably not the most qualified person to talk about the dynamics of. But in terms of scarcity, or in terms of the tokenomics of it moving forward, I think what it teaches you is that we are very early. The rewards themselves will sustain, but it's been a long known fact that validator rewards are diminished. Miners must be prioritized. Miners generate the commodities. Validators will be able to monetize and build revenue on their gated access to the network. And it will be up to them to produce, to create unique and interesting revenue models and business models on which to sustain themselves within the network.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, touching on one other point there, you said 6 million are mined, 21 million, available. One thing you should also know is we're still pre-first halving on Tau, right? So for example, September 2025. So that would put Tau in the same, life cycle phase of its life cycle as kind of Bitcoin in 2010, let's say, with the same dynamics. So that's the reason the emissions are so high, and that's the reason there's such a great reward right now for holding, staking, delegating your Tau. There's so much more from a kind of technical perspective we could talk about UMA consensus and, the proof of work versus proof of stake. I want to kind of leave that. Maybe we can leave it for another conversation. I want to talk about what you're building because, you have a number of projects in the space. Taostats, which is probably the most used site in the Bittensor ecosystem, and Corcel, which is an incredible competitor to something like a ChatGPT. Where do you want to start? You want to start with Taostats because I know you founded that first.
Taostats now has evolved into essentially de facto blockchain explorer and data analytics site for the network. That's not to say we're resting on our laurels and we don't think that someone else could come along and do what we're doing. So we are currently in production of what we now version 3. I can't tell you too much of the extra cool things that we're doing in case someone who is building a competitor says, oh, I didn't think of that, let's do that too. Essentially to cement our position. We value really being able to provide accurate data, the most accurate data to all participants on the network, to allow people to visualize the unique aspects that make Bittensor different to other just blockchains or projects, and provide that data, analytics of that, visualizations to that, and also to allow anyone to form a fundamental understanding of Bittensor. That's one of our new avenues, and also to allow anyone to build on top of, let's say, the network data. So that's where Taostats is going.
Can I just say, as a daily Taostats user, I can attest to the fact that you're not resting on your laurels. It seems like every week there's a new and exciting update with more information to kind of dig deeper into the Bittensor ecosystem.
Now I just Easter egg them out. And
yeah, exactly.
And I was looking for someone clicks on a menu and goes, "Oh, well, that wasn't there." Yeah,
it's great.
The current edition, but our focus is much more on what would say. I do often find me responding to things saying that'll be in the next version. I feel like we've reached a limitation to what we can do in our current stack.
Can I just say also UX UI, like very user friendly, very well designed. I know things like Etherscan can be a little bit difficult and daunting, specifically for new, people that are new to networks. Taostats is very easy to use, just from a kind of a user perspective. Let's talk a little bit about Corcel as well, because this was a really, what I would suspect it's probably got the most usage of any kind of subnet front end application on the network. But talk a bit about what Corcel is, and then also what's powering it in the back end.
Okay. So Corcel was created as API access to the original text prompting network, and the foundation encouraged us to do it, and we were happy to take up this moniker. And at the beginning, there was other competitors and people doing things. Currently, it's really the only public API access through a validator to the network. And that's what we wanted to do, to encourage people to build on the network. That said, each time we created an endpoint, we then wanted to create a little app in order to showcase what that endpoint could do to motivate people to build and do better. So what we ended up doing originally was just forking off-the-shelf GPT UI app, Stable Studio, which is Dream Studio's open source alternative. So we plugged that into Bittensor. Well, there you go, guys. Look, here's an image generation app. Here's a chat app. Now you can interact with the network. And it was supposed to be that people went, "Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to do something completely different, but I understand what you could do." And instead we were lauded as, wow, these guys have built apps. They're building apps on Bittensor. Was not my intention. I want you to build the apps. I want to provide the infrastructure there. However, when we rebranded, we realized that there was that we were being short-sighted in just wanting to be the API provider, and that we could, very much like OpenAI, do both and come out with very strong products, not just taking off-the-shelf open source existing products and rebranding them, but actually creating our own products that work the way we wanted to, and showcase the aspects of the subnets that we felt were the strongest. So our products will integrate any subnet that we feel has strong, reliable data provision. But then we also have a responsibility, I would say, through doing this to ensure the positive growth of the network. And this is really something that we're focusing on at the moment. We've got a bunch of app updates coming out very soon, and then we're going to be putting a huge amount of time and effort into building, shall I say, infrastructure for the network that all network participants can use, that enables us to take the network to where we need it to be for our future vision. If that makes sense, most I can do. But you won't have to wait too long to find out. And that's really where we see ourselves as providing a sort of a two-pronged attack. First of all, we're there for developers who want to build on Bittensor, who understand the power they have available, and give them that access. But then we're also there from a front-facing consumer app to provide cool products to people who have no idea what Bittensor is and never need to.
Well, yeah, it's amazing you say that, because Corcel is also the first thing that I usually show people when I'm trying to explain really what Bittensor is. So it's Corcel.io. I highly recommend go play with it a little bit. It looks a lot like ChatGPT. It's pulling obviously from a Bittensor endpoint. And as you mentioned, some of the APIs that are going into the text prompting could be from something like a ChatGPT, could be from something like, Grok or Olympus, etc. And in some ways, this is just kind of like the fledgling stage, because there will be open source models that will be built and plugged into it as well. But what you're doing is aggregating a bunch of the top centralized AI to provide only the best answer to the end user or the end output. So I look at it almost like an LLM aggregator, why use ChatGPT when you could use Corcel for free and get an aggregate of kind of the best answers across all of the different centralized AIs?
And as a developer, why use a tier 1 OpenAI key when you can use Corcel and leverage the power of 200 enterprise keys all through one API endpoint?
Amen. I mean, this is the first iteration, right? Like, this is the promise of Bittensor, and this is why I think it's so exciting. And I really just appreciate you kind of pioneering this way and showing kind of the roadmap for the next wave of developers to come build on Bittensor. I think we're already kind of running out of time, Mog, but it was incredible chatting with you. I hope we can do this again sometime. If people want to find you or follow you, how would they do so?
Twitter, Mod Machine. And I think you can find, in fact, anywhere, Mod Machine on the internet, in the real world, you find Mod Machine, you find me. And of course, Corcel.io and Taostats.io to interact with what we build.
Amazing. Mog, thanks so much. Really appreciate your time, man.
Thank you.
All right, one final disclosure from our legal department. None of the companies featured on this show are paid promotions. This podcast is simply an extension of our diligence process here at Contango. That said, we may eventually invest in some of the projects we cover. Nothing in this show should be considered investment advice. Crypto is risky. Always do your own research and never invest more than you can afford to lose. That's our show. If you like the content, please like and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use. And don't let the alpha stop now. If you're a crypto investor, researcher, developer, or founder, we would love to meet you. You can apply to our free private alpha group where we host discussions, share opportunities, and connect some of the brightest minds in crypto. You can find more information on our website at contango.digital. Until next time, keep your ears down and alpha up.